Democrat presidential candidates say they'll forgive all $1.6 trillion in student loan debt. And that's the sane part of this episode of Right Angle, brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. I'm with Stephen Green and Bill Whittle. And gentlemen, there is an embarrassment of riches when it comes to policy proposals from the Democratic presidential candidates. One that is shared by both, let me see if I can do it the way I normally do it, Elizabeth Sanders and Bernie Warren. That is... is shared by both of them, is that they want to forgive student loan debt. And, lest you think this is just them pandering to the youth vote and thinking that they finally figured out a way to rock the vote and get those young people to show up, Sanders and Warren both believe that, among other benefits, student loan forgiveness would help borrowers buy a home, save for retirement, launch new businesses, and start a family, and that it would reduce the wealth gap and provide economic stimulus to the middle class. Because all of a sudden, it's kind of like cash for clunkers. All that money is suddenly changing hands. And when you scoop the water out of the swimming pool with a bucket and pour it in the other side of the swimming pool, you have more water. So Stephen Green, we'll deal with this aspect of it first, and I'll make Bill suffer through the other, even weirder thing.
But thank you. I'm usually better at the weirder stuff. You sure you don't want to?
So this is an idea clearly that is shamelessly pandering to the young. But do you think even the young are that stupid not to realize that if you forgive all student loan debt, then you essentially destroy the entire market as it is for college education?
Well, let's talk about why it's so expensive to go to college these days. Government tried to make it affordable. And that's a God's honest truth. When you have loans that are backed by the federal government, it becomes very easy and very cheap for students to assume debt that they're never, ever going to be able to pay back. And what that does is it allows colleges and universities to raise prices because, well, number one, the kids are basically economically illiterate, mostly due to lack of experience, but also because of a crappy educational system in the high schools. And so there's this pool of essentially free money for the colleges. So they are competing on things like who has the nicest dorms, whose cafeterias have the best food, and all the rest of this stuff. When I was going to the University of Missouri, it's not that long ago. It was in the late 80s. Our dorm rooms were wall-to-wall linoleum. The beds, like 14 feet on a side square room. The beds were these, metal cots basically with a mattress about that thin on them. There's a desk made out of the cheapest countertop material of all time, a couple of metal chairs, and a couple of built-in bookshelves.
Cinder block walls painted puke green.
The walls were cinder block with some paint slapped on them. And the cafeteria served cafeteria food. And as a result, I was able to get through a semester for less than $2,000, and that's including classes, books, room and board, and a little spending money, like $25 or $30 a week spending money, which of course I spent entirely on pizza and booze. That was affordable back then. In fact, if you were willing to work part-time and save up your money working full-time in the summer, you didn't have to take any student debts. You go to the University of Missouri website right now, and I think for the exact same education, except worse, you have to pay, I want to say last time I looked it up, and this is a couple of years ago, it's something like $13,000 per semester. That's way more than inflation. And what are you paying for? You're paying for a nicer dorm, you're paying for better food, and you're paying for a crap load more administrators to do all the stupid stuff that colleges can afford to do because there's this huge pool of government-backed money. If you want to make college affordable again, stop having government make it affordable.
Well, Bill Whittle, I'm sure we will get better decisions out of the Department of Education at the federal level when President Warren takes the oath of office. And that's because in an unrelated story, she was speaking to a group in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, before the flawlessly executed Iowa caucuses. And she said that she would only appoint a Secretary of Education that a 9-year-old transgender youth that she had met would interview and approve of, because that's the only way, Bill, that she could be sure that they would have a Secretary of Education, not like that monster Betsy DeVos, somebody who would actually be sensitive to the needs of children. Is this something guaranteed to get a surge of Democrats coming to the polls to make sure that this kind of decision-making authority is delegated from the President of the United States?
It is exactly the kind of thing that would get a surge of Democrats going to the polls. Unfortunately, they would be voting for Donald Trump at the polls, and this kind of thing is just too good to be true. We did a show not too long ago on Greta Thunberg and the idea that that the left has that children are the wisdom of children, the wisdom and the honesty of children. Little children are not wise, and they're sure as hell not honest. They're a bunch of badly informed little liars, and our job is to beat that out of them over the course of a few years of teenage years, and set them on their way so they can learn the rest of the lessons on their own. So to say that the person who we're going to put in charge of the Department of Education is somebody who's going to have to be vetted by a 9-year-old tells you how serious their politics are. And then to say that it has to be a transgender 9-year-old, in other words, a 9-year-old who has not yet gone through puberty and had the hormones injected into their system that actually turns them into one kind of a sexual identity or another, is another indication of how absurd this is. And I had said for well over a year now that because of people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who we should elect a golden statue to after Trump's landslide win in 2020, because of this virtue signaling, it is a philosophy that cannot possibly, if you pardon the expression, progressivism is unsustainable. It's unsustainable because there's constant, ongoing, perpetual need to top themselves in terms of virtue signaling. Conservatism works because, hey, this works pretty well. Yeah, it worked before. Yeah, it's working now. Yeah, can we make some adjustments? Yeah, maybe. But we don't have to constantly try to be more conservative than the next person and change everything and make the world more and more ridiculous so we can show that we're more conservative than the rest of the guys. The way you show that you're the most conservative person out there is to leave things alone that are working. So when you have a philosophy that's predicated on virtue signaling, and as actual injustice gets smaller and smaller and smaller in this country, you have to go further and further and further and further and further out on a limb. I honestly do not see that we could be that lucky, that we really could be that lucky. But when you look at how deeply inside this bubble of suck that these people are, it's entirely possible that Elizabeth Warren entirely does think that the American people would warm to the idea that having a member of the cabinet determined by a transgendered 9-year-old is the way we should do things. Okay, that's fine. You know what that tells me? It tells me that we don't need a Department of Education, because if we are willing as a nation to say that this critical position is filled by a 9-year-old child who's having some kind of emotional difficulties, then you don't need that department. You really don't. It can go, and maybe we could have somebody like we could have a 9-year-old transgender scientist take a look at the Department of Energy, for example, because I'm not entirely sure that needs to be there either.
I think that any sensible 9-year-old would quickly figure out that we don't need a Department of Education, but that's asking a lot of an adult Democrat. The whole issue of forgiving student loans is one of a whole raft of things about which Democrats get in a lather that sound good on the face of it, because who doesn't despise the fact that they've got to pay off their student loans over a period of a decade or 2 decades or however long it takes most Americans to do that. And you occasionally see these horrifying headlines about how much student debt there is out there. And naturally, the human urge within us to avoid responsibility for things that we've already incurred is strong. And so we say, well, yeah, that sounds great. I mean, I would love to not have to pay back my student loans. but we don't think about it much further than that. And if you're really concerned, as Bill suggested, if you're concerned, or sorry, Steve suggested, if you're concerned about the cost of college education, the way to bring down the cost of college education is to forbid the use of loan money in paying for it. Is to not have any government-backed loans and say any organization that wants to offer a college diploma can do so, but it's got to be on a cash basis. If you want to go to college, pay cash. You'll find two things will happen there. One, college will be reserved, as it used to be, mostly for the wealthy. And two, everybody will suddenly realize that we don't need college anymore because the entire accumulated knowledge of humanity is at our fingertips if you can afford, $20 or $30 a month for an internet connection, and you can actually guide your own college education. And people will find ways to get their own certifications in things in which they're seeking expertise. So the real reason why there is a government student loan program is not to make college more affordable for young people. The reason it's there is to make college administrators and professors and the people who work for universities able to earn a living off the backs of long-term borrowing at low interest subsidized by the federal government. And that's what's wrong with the system. And you'd quickly shake that out if you said cash only, please. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.